Optimism in Action is produced in collaboration with KAZU, your NPR station for the Monterey Bay area of California. You'll find this episode and archived episodes at kazu.org/sidebar.
People who have voted before are more likely to vote again, and people who vote consistently are more likely to keep voting. So we need to give them a reason to vote. We're in a moment right now where folks are ready to take action and they are ready to do something different. We need to help make that process clean and easy and help folks understand why it matters.
That's today's guest on Sidebar, Kate Barr, a trailblazing advocate for democracy.
Sidebar is brought to you by Monterey College of Law, San Luis Obispo College of Law, Kern County College of Law, and Empire College of Law, located in Santa Rosa.
Welcome to Sidebar, featuring conversations about optimism in action with lawyers and leaders inspiring change. And now your co-hosts, Jackie Gardina and Mitch Winnick.
Mitch, I'm really excited about this week's guest, in part because it brings us full circle with Sidebar. We started Sidebar with David Pepper talking about his book, Saving Democracy, in which gerrymandering is a big part of what we talked about. We know gerrymandering is a big part of the national conversation right now with what's going on in Texas, California, Virginia, Indiana, Missouri, and all of the maps being drawn and redrawn. And so when I saw the work that Kate Barr does through an organization called the Can't Win Victory Fund, which is completely designed to help candidates run and lose in districts that are essentially unwinnable because of the maps that are drawn in particular states, I thought, wow, you've got to be optimistic to have that as your goal, or just have absolutely zero ambition, because losing in a losable place is easy to do. Kate, really excited to have you at Sidebar to talk about the Can't Win Victory Fund and the work that you're doing around fair maps and gerrymandering.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Kate, we're glad to have you on Sidebar Optimism in Action, and I mirror Jackie's comments, which are the activities that your organization and those who are involved in it are doing really are, in our initial view, nothing but optimism that democracy can work and can be saved.
Thank you. I love to talk about losing in impactful ways.
So let's start there. How did the Can't Win Victory Fund even get started?
Much like my entire political career, which is very short, it was by accident. In 2024, I ran for state senate in North Carolina in a gerrymandered district. North Carolinians know this story, but most others don't. Basically, in 2022, our state Supreme Court said partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional. And we got a fair congressional map for the first time in many, many years in our state. And we sent 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans to Washington, D.C. in the 2022 election. But we also lost control of the state Supreme Court. And that new court was much more conservative and decided to rehear this partisan gerrymandering case, which is Harper v. Hall for the legal nerds out there. And they overturned that verdict and essentially said that partisan gerrymandering is allowable under the North Carolina Constitution. And that means that in 2024, we got some totally outrageous, ridiculous gerrymandered maps. And I got really mad about it. I had been represented by a brilliant woman as my state senator for a couple of terms, Natasha Marcus, and she was too loud and too female in the state legislature. And so they drew her into a super red county, and that was Senate District 37. She wisely decided not to run there because it was unwinnable. And when I had the opportunity to take it on, basically I was standing in line drinking a glass of wine at a Christmas festival, which is the perfect time to ask someone to do something ridiculous, just for the record. I was like, I don't really want to go to Raleigh 8 months of the year for $13,000 and ram my head into a brick wall, but I sure do want to throw an absolute fit about these absurd maps. And so I ran for state senate as Kate Barr Can't Win. And I thought I was just going to go back to my day job after that election in November of 24. But it turned out we had some success. All of us were wondering, and when I say all of us, I mean literally anyone who's paying attention to North Carolina politics was curious about how a can't-win campaign was going to turn out. The fear being that it's demotivating, right? Because you tell people that you can't win, why are they going to show up? What's the point? But it turned out that it was actually really impactful for that district, particularly that very red county, which is one of only 8 counties out of 100 in North Carolina that got bluer in 2024. The other 7 were hit by Hurricane Helene. We maintained voter turnout to 2020 levels. A lot of things pointed to the idea that maybe showing up for people in an honest and radically transparent way was actually meaningful and motivating and helped build infrastructure for the future. So instead of going back to my day job, I founded the Can't Win Victory Fund with the commitment to try to help candidates run impactful loser campaigns, initially across North Carolina, although we have honestly had requests now from 19 different states to come and work in those places too.
That's an incredibly impressive story. And I don't want to have lost in this the fact that this all started by your measure of what you thought was success when there were balanced maps. It wasn't that you were just out to get a partisan shift in maps, but as you just said, you had 7 and 7. That was where you thought, okay, we've won. We're successful. And it was the taking away of that parity and balance that really started a lot of this.
That is so important. I piss people off from both parties pretty regularly because what I actually want and what folks who support the Can't Win Victory Fund want is a representative democracy. And North Carolina is a purple state, and so we should have purple representation. And that is what is right for voters. That means that voters are able to hold leaders accountable. We're able to have our needs be the top priorities. I make plenty of people mad on both sides.
I would encourage everyone to go to can'twinvictoryfund.com because one, it's actually a fun website to scroll through and read and listen to the videos on there. But you do put an emphasis not just on supporting candidates, but actually that move towards fair maps. I'm wondering if you could speak to that idea of what fair maps look like. California just decided to do away with an independent council that took the maps out of the partisan hands and put it into an independent council because of a reaction to what was happening on the national level. Do you agree with that move, or would you say California stand pat because fair maps are what everyone should be going for?
I honestly hate all of the gerrymandering. I understand why California and why Californians made the move that they did. I mostly go around telling people we have had millions of people now sacrifice their voting power, which means that it's on us, those of us who still do have voting power, to make that sacrifice worth it. Frankly, North Carolina had a lovely little mid-district congressional redistricting in October because the head of our state Senate needed President Trump's endorsement in his primary campaign. So he gave away an additional congressional seat in our state. And that's just honestly garbage. So the goal is always independent commissions. You can think of it as jury duty for map making. The folks who serve on those commissions don't have to have special knowledge. They get a lot of support from experts in the field. California was one of the gold standards for what an independent commission could do. You can look at somewhere like Michigan as well. The first step in North Carolina is we have to flip our state Supreme Court because we have to undo this Harper v. Hall second round decision. So we took the first step in that process by electing Justice Allison Riggs in 2024 by literally the skin of our teeth, 734 votes. And some of you may remember that it took us 6 months to defend that win because the Republicans tried to throw out 68,000 legal valid votes in order to basically put their person on the court. Our next step is to reelect Justice Anita Earls in 2026. She is, in my opinion, the best state Supreme Court justice in the country. She's been on the long list for the Supreme Court. She's absolutely a brilliant jurist. And so outside of her being important for fair maps, she writes beautiful, brilliant, scathing dissents and is like the RBG of North Carolina. And then our third step is to elect 3 Democratic justices in 2028. And the belief is that once we do that, there will be Democratic control of the state Supreme Court and that they will rehear for a third time a partisan gerrymandering case and return to the original decision that partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional. And then in 2030, we get fair maps with the new census. What's tricky in all of that is I've not said the words independent commission, right? So for North Carolina, we have to get to a place of having fair maps to be able to elect a state legislature that is actually representative of our state, and then be able to hold those folks accountable and demand an independent commission from them, because that is how the independent commission eventually comes to the state. It's a long path. We can get fair maps first and then independent commission second.
Kate, tell us more about the process of encouraging and soliciting new candidates, because I think that's also a critical part of your strategy.
A huge part of what we're doing in the Can't Win Victory Fund is making sure that there are candidates running everywhere across the state who are capable, quality messengers to be able to talk about fair maps and make sure that voters really understand why it's important to get all the way to the bottom of that ballot.
And one of the things I find most compelling about what you're doing is what you just said, which is you're empowering the individual voter. And you're saying, I understand that the statistics and the polls may show that this might not be a winnable election, but that doesn't mean your vote isn't valuable, that your vote doesn't send a message. Talk a little about that, because I think that's one of the most powerful messages, that this isn't really about any one candidate. This is about the process and the value of voting, which is how we define our democracy.
There's so much I could say about this. So first, voting is a habit. It's a habit like brushing your teeth or flossing or any of those things that we need to do regularly, but maybe cause us some level of inconvenience. People who have voted before are more likely to vote again, and people who vote consistently are more likely to keep voting. So we need to give them a reason to vote. We need to help make that process clean and easy and help folks understand why it matters. The other piece of it, there are a whole bunch of voters in North Carolina and across the country. 81%, in fact, of our voters have a state legislative race that's not competitive. And that means that they don't have candidates that have to show up and knock doors and make phone calls and go to town halls and kiss babies and go to church and all the things that you think about a candidate doing to earn votes. 81% of us don't get that. And so when we can truly show up in those communities and reach those voters who feel appropriately left behind, because they have been, if we show up for them, they will show up for us. The story I tell around this is I was knocking doors for my state Senate campaign. I knocked on the door of an older woman's house. She's 80, and she had lived in that house for 40 years. No one had ever knocked on her door for a political purpose. She was so excited that I came to her door that she literally tried to give me an 8-week-old Springer Spaniel puppy named Minnie. She was just so thrilled to have a person see her and ask her how she was doing. And I was dead honest with her. I cannot win. And she said, I do not care. It matters that you came. And that is true across the country.
Support for Optimism in Action comes from the Monterey College of Law, a nonprofit law school serving the Monterey Bay region with evening classes on campus or in a hybrid online format. More details and applications available at montereylaw.edu. That's montereylaw.edu.
I want to talk a little bit about what you were hinting at in terms of voter behavior. It's a habit. People want to be seen. They want to have a choice. I want to relate that back to what was your day job. You've got 2 decades of experience in behavioral science. What comes from that training and background into the work that you're doing now?
So much of my work is informed by behavioral science, behavioral economics, persuasive communication. I'm surprised, honestly, at how behind politics is in these areas. For example, we know that people will pay attention for about 3 seconds. That's not a failing in humanity. That's just the reality of how our brains work. We have 2 different speeds for our brains, a fast one and a slow one, and the fast one runs like 90% of the time. If you have an important message for someone, you better be able to communicate that in 3 seconds or less. That means using words that everyone can understand. That's not dumbing things down. That's actually just making your message accessible to the people who need to hear it. It's really about meeting people where they are and making sure that we are using the language and showing up in the places that they would already go. You don't want folks to have to work hard to understand what you stand for. So that's a piece of it. When it comes to the Can't Win Victory Fund, a huge component of it is this idea of telling people that you're going to lose. Because when you knock on a door and you say, "Hi, I'm Kate Barr. I'm your losing candidate for State Senate District 37, but I'm running because I believe that voters deserve a choice, and I care about what you have to say." As soon as you tell a voter or any human that you're going to lose, you take the transaction out of that conversation. You're no longer a person trying to get something from them. You're now a person who is trying to stand up for something out of principle. And that voter will now listen to you with different ears. You have more credibility. You have a better ability to actually have an honest conversation with them. Gerrymandering itself is a beautiful Trojan horse for this because pretty much everyone hates it. And you can relate gerrymandering to just about any problem in anyone's life. And so you start with common ground, hating that our voting maps aren't fair. And then you talk about the thing that is most important to that voter and relate that to how our voting maps aren't fair. And that always relates back to if we can't hold our leaders accountable, then they don't have to listen to us. And that's wrong. All of that is messaging. All of that is persuasive communication. All of that is understanding empathy and humanity. But it's also the way that our brains have evolved to look for community and to look for common ground and to look for someone who is like me. Not to be cynical about it because it is a principled thing, but we can use the way our brains work to deliver these messages in effective ways and to build common ground, and we don't always do a good job of that.
Kate, that really reinforces a conversation we had with Bill Monning, retired Senate Majority Leader here in California. He actually was the opposite end of the spectrum. He was in an only winnable district for his entire time, and yet he told almost exactly the same story. He said the thing that was most important to him about serving all of those years was going door to door and getting someone to open the door so he could say, "What's important to you? What would you like to see done?" And that's where he would start the conversation. It seems interesting to me that he's telling the same story on the opposite side of the coin, where there was nothing he was going to do that could lose, but he still felt his obligation in representing the public was to engage in that conversation about what's important to the voter.
He's also using a clever trick called the open loop, where when you open with a question like that, you start to access the slower part of someone's brain, and that means you can have a different kind of conversation with them.
Let me ask you about something that's a little harder, and it's slightly off topic of what you're addressing, but I think it's in all of our listeners' minds right now. We are at a moment in time where we appear to have some very dangerous things going on in our public streets. We're now dealing with violence and guns, and the first communication is one of threat. And then there's concern that the first response by government that are obvious lies. So if you try to use what you understand from your day job into that type of a scenario, how can that help us better understand how we can get out of that loop?
It's such a good question and such a tricky problem because when you start talking about fear, We are talking about our old reptile brains being in action, and that makes it really difficult to reach someone with a long-winded message. I think there are kind of two things going on, and I want to talk about how we are trying to combat exactly this issue right now. But first, I want to talk about some of what I think we're seeing happen in folks' brains who maybe were right-leaning but not super MAGA, the 3% that swing back and forth and decide our presidential elections. For a long time, there has been a building conservative community, and it is in our nature to seek community, and those have been online communities. It was definitely accelerated during COVID when we were locked in our homes and we had to find social outlets on the internet, and those communities become a part of our identity. That's just how we work. And we're looking at a moment where folks have a part of their identity in conflict with their values. That means that they have an internal war going on that feels like a really big threat. It can even feel like trauma to think about having to lose a piece of your identity. And that's really tough. The human nature impulse is defensiveness, to hide from it, to bury your head in the sand, to accept whatever story is put to you that can help you reconcile this dissonance between your identity and values without having to actually reconcile them. And that makes us susceptible to these lies. It makes us susceptible to believing a narrative that allows us to not have to do something really hard and traumatic internally. When we think about asking folks who have voted Republican consistently for their whole lives or even most of their lives to then suddenly vote Democrat, that's a pretty big chasm in some cases for them to cross. And I think a lot of folks are going to do it. And I think that people have reached the point, bizarrely, I'm going to say thank you to social media, where they are believing what they're seeing and not what they're just being told out of propaganda machines. But something I'm experimenting with here in North Carolina is I actually changed my voter registration to Republican back in May, and I'm running for Congress in the Republican congressional primary for my district. But I'm running on progressive policies and as an out loud fake Republican, not tricking anybody. I've just changed the letter. And it's a little bit of a question mark. When you give folks permission to vote for something different, but it doesn't require them to go through this identity crisis. You can vote for me and still say you voted Republican your entire life. Like, what happens? I genuinely don't know. I truly don't know how it's going to come out. And it's yet another way for us to talk about fair maps and how the fact that we have gerrymandered maps means that the primaries turn into the real elections, and we have such ridiculously low primary turnout that a fake Republican like me can actually win a Republican primary because so few voters come and vote. And so in some ways, this is like the extension of Kate Barr can't win as a Democrat in the general, which is ridiculous. It is equally ridiculous that I could win as a fake Republican running for Congress in the Republican primary. So all of it is giving people stories they can sink their teeth into, trying to work in alignment with the way our brains work instead of in opposition to that. And then when people are ready, which we're in a moment right now where folks are ready to take action and they are ready to do something different, making sure they have an avenue to actually express that, making sure they have somewhere to put that energy.
So you're literally a rhino.
I'm literally a rhino. We even have rhino stickers. Yes.
That's an amazing step that you took to challenge the power imbalance by not just running against the candidate, but running in the primary. I love that. So one of the questions that I had, and it's related a little bit to what Mitch brought up, which is that right now political violence is at a high point. And people are in some ways scared to engage on the political stage because of the target that it could put on them. You said that you've had requests from 19-20 states to help run losing campaigns. What does it take to stand up and say, I'm willing to speak out about values that seem to run counter to how my district votes and speak loudly and clearly on things that I think are valuable, given the height of political violence that we're in right now?
There are two different answers for this, one for can't win and one for can win. In this fake Republican campaign, I absolutely get death threats. My 9-year-old daughter is afraid I'm going to get shot, and it's a thing we have to talk about every night. And quite frankly, until about a couple weeks ago, I would just tell her, don't worry, sweetheart, I'm a suburban, middle-aged white lady. Nobody bothers me. And that's not true anymore. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. In a weird sort of way, the fact that it's not true anymore means that we are moving farther away from this white privilege situation that we have been in for so long. Because when you talk to Black folks and brown folks, the idea of fearing a government agency might kill you is not new. And they're like, welcome to the club. We've been here for centuries. And it's only new that white women and white male gun owners are now a part of that club. That's scary. I wish that we could stand up for our principles without fearing for our lives. And also, I have to look my kids in the face and tell them that I did everything I could in this time. There's a lot of people going around talking about, you think that you would have been part of the Underground Railroad, if you think that you would have helped hide German Jews in the 30s and 40s, this is that moment. You need to be the person you'd like to imagine yourself to be. That's what I'm trying to do. On the can't win candidate side, it actually is a little bit simpler. Because you're running against a system and you're being honest about the fact that you're going to lose, you aren't perceived as a threat in the same way. And so it is in some ways a safer way to run and to talk about these issues in districts where that might be otherwise difficult, because the foundation of your platform is voter representation. It's democracy. Pretty much everybody in those districts gets on board with that idea. And voters aren't dumb. They know they're in a can't win district, and they will appreciate that you're not out there lying to them about your chances or trying to take their money to fund a campaign that's not going to go anywhere. That actually insulates our candidates from this risk of political violence in a lot of ways. That's not to say that there's not zero. I mean, they are incredibly brave. Some of our candidates this go round are just some of the most amazing, coolest, most incredible humans. Many of them never thought they would run for office and have just chosen to step up. They're actually interesting leaders. My hope is that in 2030, when North Carolina has fair maps, they will run in these competitive districts and win. And they'll have had practice, and they'll have name recognition, and they'll know exactly what they're doing, and we'll be behind them the whole way. It's a bit of a bench build in that way as well. And they'll have credibility in their community so that when they do say, hey, I can actually win this time, folks will believe them.
That is an amazing answer, especially that second part. It started as perhaps a lark at a Christmas party with some wine, but what you have made it makes me feel optimistic about the direction our democracy can go. I just want to say thank you.
Aw, thank you. I'm glad that it is making you feel optimistic. It makes me feel really optimistic, too.
Part of the thing is that I'd never perceived losing as a winning strategy, but the way that you have defined it, described it, and made it in a long-term strategy, it makes so much sense, and I love that.
What you've done is pique the interest of listeners, individuals who are not just in North Carolina, but as you've said, in these other states who've now said, I didn't see a path to be engaged before, but this actually makes sense. What would you say to those people about what steps they should take next, how they could get involved, they could get engaged? What should they do?
The first step is we run on donor dollars only. The number of states we can reach is determined by the amount of money that we raise. That is just our answer. So you can donate at can'twinvictoryfund.com. That's a 501c4, which means that we don't have to disclose our donors. And so that helps some folks feel safer engaging in political donations right now. The other thing is go volunteer for candidates running for office in unwinnable districts. Every state has some, 81% of the state legislative districts in the country. So go knock doors with one of the candidates. Go and help them set up a town hall. Put yard signs out. Donate $100 to them. $100 in one of those districts goes a very long way. We run most of these campaigns on less than $2,000. It's an incredibly efficient way to deploy your money as well. Follow us on social media at Can't Win Victory Fund.
Kate, thank you very much for sharing this message with us. And it's a surprising message of optimism, which I did not think we were going to be able to get to, even given the origin of your organization. You've done an amazing thing. And like Jackie, I now see there is a ray of hope, even in losing, which is not something that comes natural to me.
Truly my pleasure.
If people want to support your campaign, if they want to help you in some way, how can they do that?
Well, my primary is on March 3rd, so it is really right around the corner. They can go to katebarcanwin.com or follow me at katebarcanwin.
That's great, Kate. Thank you so much. Mitch, one of the things I really appreciated about the Can't Win Victory Fund's approach is that it's really helping voters understand the system that they're in by having candidates come and say, I recognize that I'm not going to be able to win in this district, but I think it's important that you have someone who you can talk to about the issues and that you have a choice. And it really helps highlight for voters what it means to have a competitive district versus one that is gerrymandered to the point of being unwinnable for anyone other than the incumbent. I really like the systemic approach that the Can't Win Victory Fund takes the long term, building that bench, teaching people so that when there are fair maps, there are people who are ready to step in and build the democracy that we all want for this nation.
Jackie, the very nature of what you just said is what I thought was the true essence of the Can't Win Victory Fund, which is thinking for the future. The inherent message is that the system can still work. People can have a voice in our democracy. And I think that is, by its very nature, a definition of optimism.
Once again, I want to thank everyone who joined us today on Sidebar. And as always, Mitch and I would love to know what's on your mind. You can reach us at SideBarMedia.org.
Sidebar would not be possible without our producer, David Eakin, who composes and plays all of the music you hear on Sidebar. Thank you also to Dina Dowsett, who creates and coordinates Sidebar's social media marketing.
Optimism in Action is produced in collaboration with KAZU, your NPR station for the Monterey Bay area of California. You'll find this episode and archived episodes at kazu.org/sidebar.